Hey everyone, so I made this video to show how we are hopefully going to be applying the rubric to the assignment, in this case, the critical reading of a text assignment in University 109 for honors at Grand Canyon University. If you're in my classes, great. This is exactly how I'm going to be applying the rubric to you. If you're not in my classes, if something I'm saying doesn't jive with what your instructor is saying, please go straight to your instructor. Whatever they say goes. We do have slightly different methods in how we teach, and we should be going with whatever your instructor says. But this is how I'm reading it. This is what I'm looking for. So hopefully it's helpful. The first part of the rubric is the bulk of our assessment. It's 60% of your score, and it's about how you explain to us the meaning of the quote. Now, in my classes, I don't assign the quote per se. If you are assigned a quote, then you need to understand that quote really well, which we'll get into. But this whole thing is about how well you actually assign it. So this is a big deal. This is how we can see an A paper from a B paper, and this is the general category. The later categories, if you do those well, this grade should be pretty good. It's really hard to mess up if you've done all the parts well. But if you've gotten the gist of a quote, we don't want it to be too detrimental because you understood the quote and you somewhat defined it for us. Maybe you were just lack of organized or whatever. We want that to be the bulk of the grade. That's why this is the biggest part. It's really just about whether or not you were able to achieve the goal. And the goal here is you explain a quote really well. So there's steps to that. Part of that is defining all the key terms in the quote. In our examples, in one example, we talked about the unexamined life is not worth living. We should know what unexamined means. Plato and Socrates use the word examine several times in the piece. You can go to those other times. You can look at those other instances to really define that term for us so we know what an unexamined and examined means. And it really doesn't matter which you're using, as long as we know what it means. Then you have to show us why it was not worth living for him, because he's the one saying it. It's not as general. It's him talking to us. And so those are the two things we're looking for in that quote. If you're using the Tao, in my class, we talked about the more picky the laws are, the more thieves and robbers there are. And many people would misconstrue this, and that's a big deal. Big part of this is whether or not the laws themselves are picky or whether there's a lot of them. So we don't know what the more is actually applying to. It could be just to the laws, the more of those laws that there are, or it could be too picky, and in that case, it's about the nitpickiness of the law. Things like, oh, well, if you write a law about how belt buckles should be, of course, you make outlaws of anyone who doesn't want to follow those rules. And so that's what we're talking about here. In mine, you'll see, to thine own self be true. I'm using Hamlet. We'll talk about that. And in particular, it's this above all. Why is this above all? I need to deal with that first. It's the first thing in the quote. This above all, to thine own self be true. Why is this above all? Is it that it's the most important? What is it? And so we would need to deal with that, which is what I do in my example. So if you understand your quote really well, that'll be helpful. That means ask your parents, ask your friends, ask other people in classes. And asking people outside of classes will be a big deal because they will ask those questions. If you just went up to someone and be like, hey, if I told you that the unexamined life is not worth living, what does that mean? Their first question is, I don't know, what does examine mean? Right? Like that's a proper response. And that tells you, oh, I got to define that term right now. So start by looking at that. And then draw connections between the quote and the interpretation, which we'll talk about. Part of this comes down to really using a good topic sentence. We'll talk about topic sentences in the next part because it's specifically about topic sentences. It's about understanding your quotes we've talked about. It's about, and that part is asking other people. It's about finding other quotes that are similar to that one because that'll be good evidence for you if you can show parallels in the imagery or in the meanings or in whatever's happening, we can use that to our benefit. Be sure to break them up. If they're longer quotes, I'm going to show you that in my example, because that's a really important thing. If you're breaking the quotes up, it would be great. So thesis, this is where we started. It's, again, a much smaller proportion of your grade, but if you do this well, it's a great guiding principle to do well in the content part. And so what it needs to do, and this is what we're talking about here on the right-hand side, your topic sentence should give us the quote and give us the interpretation of the quote and do nothing else. In my classes, I'm asking for a paragraph. That means no introduction. In my experience with teaching writing, it's really nice to have an idea of what a good paragraph is before you jump into papers, especially when it gets to things like analysis. So we're going to spend these first two assignments really understanding the argumentation and the informative aspects of paragraphing. 250 words is not a lot of space. I don't want excess language telling me about the book. We've all read it, and if we haven't read it, it's an invitation to read it. So the only thing we want in your topic sentence, the first thing you tell us, is your quote and your interpretation, and that's all. When he says this, he means this. Or, the prophet says this, which means this. That's all we need. This is actually a really good way to test whether or not your later sentences, which we'll talk about in organization, are doing any work for you. Because if you have it being that simple, it's really hard to mess up. I've actually had conversations with students in the last few days looking at their DQs, because that's what they're using to sort of gauge how well they understand this assignment. And it's a really common thing where you'll be like, oh, well, during the play, he says this. That's all you're saying. That sentence tells me you're going to summarize. And what it allows for the writers I've been working with to do is they then meander through their paragraph. They're not being explicit, they're not being direct. And that's what we want. And so you have to, in many cases, I just tell them, take the first 2 or 3 sentences, smash them together, and get rid of everything else. If it's not the quote in your interpretation, it's not right. It's about being that simple and efficient. And that's the topic sentence, or in this case, thesis development. Argument and logic is about following our analytical paragraph framework we've had since day one. I've made videos about it. I've made everything about it. It's just coming back to that, which will be coming back to you guys every assignment for the next 4 years comes down to this. Topic, sentence, evidence, discussion, right? This is the organization we're looking for. And so whatever your topic sentence is, whatever your first thing is, that's your roadmap. That tells you how to deal with it. So in our example here, this above all, well, what is this? Why is this above all? That's my first thing I have to deal with. Then I can deal with the rest of it. In the unexamined life, the reason we deal with unexamined first is that's the first content-bearing word in the entire phrase. And the more picky the laws are, we need to understand what the more picky the laws means, because that's the noun phrase, and we're not quite sure if more is dealing with picky or if more is dealing with laws. It's not really clear. And so we have to do that right away so that our readers can follow us through that quote to understand each part of the quote independently. So you have to do that. The thing that's going to disrupt you is that you need more than one piece of evidence. You're going to see my model. There's 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. I actually argue that there should be more. I've left some mistakes in from an earlier draft. I did write this in about 5 minutes, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So it isn't my best work. But I wanted to be able to show you something. I wanted a model for you guys. So this is really meant to show you how we do this organization thing. After each piece of evidence comes discussion. And that discussion's job is to show the relationship between the quote evidence that you're giving me and the topic sentence. And so you're going to see me do that in my model. Grammar and syntax. I have not been super strict in the discussion forums because I want it to be conversational. I didn't get nitpicky about citing sources or any of that because I wanted you guys to just relax and have fun talking about these books that I love. And so I really pulled back on that. But now you're turning in a formal assignment, which means we need to be more formal. That means no personal pronouns. You don't need to tell me that you think it. No existential statements. The thing is that, get rid of it. If it's not actually helping, then it's hurting. It's just distracting. It's just excess language. And the first thing you're going to see me do is take my markout tool and just cross out all of those phrases because they will not be helping you. You should be running your work through both Grammarly and Office software. Grammarly is a free online service. You can just pop your work right in there. It will show you the changes. You can pop it back out. Then you can run it through the spell check. It's great. It's a great service. One of the nice things about Grammarly is you can pay for upgrades, but even if you don't pay for upgrades, it still marks the issues. It just won't fix them for you or show you how to fix it. So you could do a little investigation or you could play with it a little bit till it's right. But it'll at least flag it as, hey, there's a problem here. But all the major things, comma errors, all of that, I find Grammarly to be a better algorithm for that service than Microsoft Office. Have your friends read it. And hopefully you have a mean friend who will give you real advice. Because having a friend read it and then be like, oh, it's great, is not helpful. It can always be better. Go to the Writing Center. I have hours in the Writing Center. All of your honors professors should have hours in the Writing Center. All of the IAs have hours in the Writing Center. All of the faculty have hours in the Writing Center. That's where you can go. It's a scheduled 30-minute visit with somebody who knows about writing. You could have them watch this video because it will not be 30 minutes and then read the paragraph and then give you advice because that's your 30 minutes. So please use that as a tool. Also go to my office hours. Go to your instructor's office hours. Go to the IA's office hours. Whatever you've got, use those resources. They're there for you. We also haven't been really stringent on APA 7th. The only thing I'm really requiring is in-text citations. Everything we gave you, all of the links we gave you, everything has a date on it. And that date is all that matters because you're going to give me the author and the date for in-text citations. I don't need an end references page yet. We're going to work on that for the summarization. But things we do want. We want the layout to be correct. We want the in-text citations to be correct. And these are things that you're going to be practicing. We'll build in other skills as you guys go along. We will start using references pages in my class with the summary assignment. Most of these things are web pages, which are already kind of messy to deal with in APA, and none of them have page numbers, so we don't need to worry about that. I don't care about paragraph numbers. We don't need to worry about that. It's just going to be the author and the year. And in proper APA 7th layout. Right margins, right header, right title page, right page numbers, all that good stuff. So here's my model. Now, I would recommend you pause it and read this. I don't expect you to really understand, but I'm going to give you some feedback, some background to this speech. This is happening in Act 1, Scene 3 of Hamlet. Polonius is sending his son Laertes off to university. It's not much different from you guys. He's a young kid. He's about to go off and make new friends and live a new life away from his parents for the first time. And so imagine how your parents feel. Imagine how scary this is for them. So this is Polonius' farewell speech. It's also his last opportunity to give his son advice, which is a very, very sort of normal thing to do in Western society. If you think about wedding speeches are often a celebration of the couple's relationship at the same time as it is an opportunity for the fathers and the mothers to give that advice the day of their marriage. It's like, this is my last opportunity. You're now a married person. Here's my last sort of parting gift as a blessing to you. And that's what he calls it. He calls it his blessing. So he's blessing his son as his son is about to leave. That's where this line comes from. This above all, to thine own self be true. So if you want to read the whole speech, go ahead and pause it right here and read through the speech. I wish I could read this like Sir Patrick Stewart, but I'm not that good. So go ahead and read it. You could also look up other YouTubes. This is a very famous soliloquy. You can definitely see Sir Patrick Stewart do this, and it'll be amazing, I'm sure. But take your time, read through this, pause it, and then we'll go on to the next slide. So hopefully you had a chance to read the speech. This, I'm just going to talk you through it so you can see how I'm reading this as an instructor. When Polonius tells his son, "This above all, to thine own self be true," he is warning his son to be careful not to lose himself to temptation. Now, this is great for a topic sentence because it's very short, simple, direct. I have the quote and I have my interpretation of the quote. What I would change is I lose the temptation part. I bring it up one more time throughout the whole paragraph, and then I never bring it up again. This is just a lesson in how I would revise it. I didn't revise it here because I wanted to show you that even I have to go through revisions, that even your professors have to go through revisions, even surface level revisions like this. When I started writing this paragraph, I had a vision of where it was going to go. It went in a different route. That's totally fine. I shouldn't have to smash it to fit this topic sentence. Instead, I can just fix the topic sentence. That's all I have to do. And so I drop the reference to temptation. Just say he's careful not to lose himself. Done. But I wanted to show you guys in reality how you can revise as you go. So that's my topic sentence. He says it to tell his son, don't lose yourself, kid. Now I'm going to give some background so we understand why he says this above all. Right? The speech comes in Act 1, Scene 3 of Hamlet as Polonius' son is about to leave for university, and Polonius wants to give his son his blessing as they part. This line is nearly the end of the speech, but it's the general advice given after a series of far more specific warnings on temptations you will face. It's the only other time I reference temptations. I shouldn't have it. It should just go. Several other warnings, period. Just end it there. And that would have been fine. I would just delete that part. I'm going to lose 4 words, but I'm well over my minimum word count. I'm safely between the 2 zones. We're great. The other side of that is I could go back and add in the temptation bit and add in. I have 150 words to play with. I can add that in and really beef this up to make it even stronger. But I have to make it stronger in one way or the other, and it's just a choice. There is no right answer. And my choice personally would be to lose the temptation bit because I don't want to have to change the end. And I'd have to make the end a lot more about temptations than it is right now. But instead I can just lose it. So, that explains why he says this above all. I might want to add some language in there about why he says this above all. I could just say, the reason he says this above all is because this line comes at the end of a speech filled with warnings to his son, but this one last thing that he wants to tell his son is the most important bit. This above all. That's all I'd have to add, and it would be great. And now I go into my evidence, right? Topic sentence. This is what he means. I gave a little context because I didn't have an intro to do it in. Great. I actually started to explain some aspects of my quote that I don't have evidence for because it's a waste of my time to show all of the things that he says. I'm just saying he says other things, but this is the most important. Now I'm going to go into evidence. I have a tagline, for example. Great. You guys should have taglines like this. It shouldn't be the same one throughout. I have a redundancy later on that we'll talk about, and I would have to edit that out too. But it's really important that we see, for example, great, I'm now going into evidence. For example, he warns his son to remember his friends and himself. Quote, those friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel. Period. I missed the period here. I'd have to go back and fix that because it's in the wrong place. The adoption tried reminds him, so I should have also the adoption tried in quotes. I messed that one up. The adoption tried reminds him, I also should have him. Who's him? So, reminds Laertes, Polonius' son, that his current friendships have already been tried and tested. And these are the friends he should keep close, while at the same time warning, now I'm going to get into the warnings here, of new-hatched, unfledged comrade. That, if you notice, comes from a much longer line. Now, my experience with young writers is you would have cited all of this middle part. You would have given me every little bit of this. It would have started here. Let me change colors. Started there, and you would have gone and given me this whole thing in one go, down to this mark. And that would have been a terrible plan, because look how much is embedded in that sentence. Look how much is embedded in that evidence. And I just dropped the middle part about palm of entertainment. If I had kept the temptation bit, that'd be a great piece of evidence to show temptation. But since I dropped it, and I'm speaking now as if I've dropped it, it doesn't help me. I'm just going to omit it. So I skipped the middle part, and I took the first two parts so that I could explain them. That the idea here is that he should keep his friends who he has been through crap with already, and he should beware the new friends who haven't been, they're unfledged. I might want to explain that part too. Or new convenient friends who might try to take advantage of his son. They're unfledged. They haven't done anything. They haven't been through anything with him. His warnings are not just about relationships, but also about finances. Here again, I'm signaling he is also warning about something. This is a signal phrase so that your audience knows I'm about to introduce new evidence, right? Costly thy habits as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy rich, not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. Here Polonius warns his son not to give into costly, fancy, rich clothing, but at the same time not dressed shabbily. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy. He wants his son to dress according to his station, but to remember frugality, not to spend excessively. These are all traits. Now I'm going to move to trying to draw all these together. It's a net. I've culled all of these quotes, and now I'm pulling that purse string at the bottom of the net, and it's closing the net out, and now I'm trying to connect everything. Trying to show that what Polonius sees in his son are these good qualities, and he doesn't want his son to pick up these other bad qualities. He wants his son to dress according to his station, but to remember frugality and not to spend expensively. These are all traits he sees in his son, and he doesn't want to see changed by years away at university. Polonius is using these lessons to define his son as a good friend with strong relationships that have been tested, as a person careful of being taken advantage of, and aware of his own naivete, and as a man of honor who can spend accordingly while maintaining his honor. That's the redundancy. Notice how weird it sounded when I said honor twice, that close together. These are all things Polonius believes are his son's, quote, true self. If he maintains these specific lessons, he will maintain himself and his personality, which explains why Polonius ends his speech reminding his son to be true to himself. So this should help to understand what I'm looking for. And again, there were problems here. These are all things that I could fix very quickly and remedy. But I only noticed them when I went back. And this is my second draft of this paragraph, and it's still not perfect. I left some of the mistakes in purposefully, but you'll notice that I messed up the grammar here at the bottom. I messed up a comma and a period up here. These are all things that I have to go back and fix. Writing is a process, and we push through that process through multiple drafts to make it as strong as possible. And that's my large recommendation to you. I've designed my assignment sequence as best I could to force you guys to at least have 2 or 3 drafts. Hopefully you guys are going through 2 or 3 drafts. That should help. But this is my model. This was all meant to show you what I'm looking for in an assignment. You are going to be doing similar things, but look, I have 3 or 4 different pieces of evidence trying to demonstrate the same thing, that Polonius wants his son to come back the same person he leaves. That's what he wants. And he's trying to remind his son of who he is and where he comes from. And I thought that message would really resonate with a lot of you as you're coming to university, and these are things you're going to have to contend with. These are things you're going to have to deal with. We will talk about you guys and your finances at the end of the semester. It's one of my favorite things to talk about when we talk about data collection is your meal cards. It's a fascinating conversation that you and your roommates all have different relationships to that meal card with. But these are all lessons you guys are going to learn. Now, if you have questions, again, if you're in my classes, I gave you all the avenues to reach out to me. If you're in other people's classes, you have the avenues to reach out to them. You also have the Writing Center. Just go into the Writing Center's areas, schedule a meeting with an IA, with a TA, with somebody who knows what the writing should look like, and spend time working on the assignment. It's a bigger part of your grade than really anything else at the moment. Whatever impact it has, it's going to change your relationship to the class for weeks until the next big assignment comes in, which is at least 3 weeks from now. So please pay attention, stay on the ball. If you have questions, ask. If you need help, seek it out. Otherwise, I hope this helped.